Welcome back to Rand on Real Estate. I'm Greg Rand, your host on 77 WABC and WABCRadio.com. We're broadcasting live from the Small Business Authority studios here in Midtown Manhattan. I'm here with Laura Smith. How you doing?
Hey, hey, hey.
Hey, hey, hey. All right, we're going to take a call. We've got Neil from New Jersey. How you doing, Neil?
Hello, how you doing?
Thanks for holding. What's on your mind?
Yeah, thanks for taking the call. Well, I'm thinking about an area called Hammock Beach, which is a little south of Jacksonville, mostly for golf. A couple of you're retiring in 3 to 5 years, vacation, then eventually to live. And I don't know too much about the area, but the place is gorgeous. And they have a lot of condos and some homes that have come down drastically. And I thought it'd probably be a good time and place to buy. I haven't done a lot of research yet, though.
So that's Jacksonville, Florida?
Well, south of Jacksonville. It's Flagler County. The actual area is called Hammock Beach. It's kind of an upscale vacation and retirement community. I don't know if you knew anything about it.
You know something? I know something about the coast up there in northern Florida. Very interesting. The trend that's been happening in Florida for the last 40 years has been, I'll oversimplify it, New Yorkers going down to South Florida, okay? And they have populated the southern half of the state on the coastline pretty heavily. So it started out with the East Coast, then it made its way to the West Coast, and basically southern Florida, most of the population is in the southern half. Now, what's been happening is so interesting is that the New Yorkers keep coming, and they're driving people away. All right? We are driving people away. People are there's a trend called halfbacks, people who were leaving South Florida who went down there 15 years ago, 20 years ago, who are now coming halfway back and going to Georgia, the Carolinas, or northern Florida. You know, a lot of people, that coastline below Jacksonville, between like Vero Beach and Jacksonville, that's a hot area right now. In part, you know who's going there? People are leaving Miami, and they're leaving Fort Lauderdale and Palm Beach, and they're going up there because it feels a little bit more like what they fell in love with 20 years ago. It's quieter, right? You can probably attest this. It's quieter. It's just this hasn't become the concrete jungle yet. And I'm not saying South Florida's a concrete jungle, but that's their words. So I like it from the standpoint of people are coming from the north, they're coming from the south, which is weird that people are coming from the south in Florida.
Ginn developmental. Ginn is a big developmental concern that had some properties go bankrupt. But this one, I don't think they own it anymore. But this, in addition to having retirement homes, there's a lot of rental income because it's a four-star hotel. The place is gorgeous, so you have both those options, till you retire. So I thought it might be a good combo.
So how many years away from retirement are you?
Oh, probably 3 to 5. So not that far.
Okay, so you would not be looking at this thing as leasing it out for a year at a time. It's a vacation place, so they would basically manage the rentals for you right there on site?
Most likely that would have to be the way I would do it until we move there, pretty much full time. I have a daughter who's going to, until she starts college, which will be in about 4 or 5 years, not practical to live there year-round. But once that happens, it will be. But, yeah, you're right. I probably would want to go down, several times a year, but rent it out in the interim, right?
Yeah, so you're going to cover some of your costs. I mean, it's unusual to be able to rent a place out only part of the year, especially when you're going to take the best weeks for yourself and actually cover all the expenses. But if you can cover your expenses for maybe a third to 50% of the year based upon the rentals, normally those kinds of places are going to take a big commission when they do your property management. But the good thing is that they're going to manage it well. Like, in other words, you're not going to show up and find a broken pipe. It's part of their complex. They're going to manage it perfectly. Nothing's going to be out of place when you get down there. But the good news is this. Had you done this 5 years ago, you'd probably be bummed out right now because it lost a lot of value in the last 5 years.
Everybody there is underwater now. That's I guess from my point of view, the benefit to me, not to them. But prices on bar are way down. So
yeah. So I here's the thing: it's going to go down a little bit further. And so if you're trying to time it perfectly, which I'm not a big advocate of, don't worry about perfect, right? Bird in hand. If you found a place that you liked and the timing works for you, are you going to get a mortgage on this property?
Probably not, actually. I'm probably going to pay cash. We're going to go down the end of June and really, take a real long look at it for a couple of days, just looking at different options down there. And that would be my timing when I'd probably want to buy it.
All right, so Neil, if you're the kind of guy that can handle buying something and having it lose a little bit of value in the next 2 years and you're not going to beat yourself up, just go for it when you're down there. If you are the kind of guy that needs to time it perfectly, you're probably going to see a better price next year than you are this year. But again, like I said, I don't sweat that kind of stuff. If you're gonna retire there, you're gonna spend a lot of time down there, and you're gonna be there for years and years and years, hopefully decades and decades. In which case, and you're paying cash. So, this is one of those times where if it feels good, do it, right?
Yeah, I think so. I tuned in just before I called in, so and I heard the tail end of your. But you do think generally values go down the next year or two? I kind of heard the tail end of what you were talking about.
Yeah, and you know what? It's interesting. I'm glad you raised that again because I wanted to make the point that it's happening largely because of the overhang of foreclosures. Okay, we have a couple of million properties that are going to be coming on the market. They are traditionally going to be in, on average, less than perfect condition because people on their way out usually kick a hole in the wall. And I'm not trying to disparage anybody, but they do tend to wind up being a little bit more dilapidated. They haven't been maintained as well. But also the banks tend to want to put quicker turnaround prices on them. In other words, if it typically takes, 4 months to sell a property in a particular zip code, the bank's going to come along and say, I want this thing sold in 60 days. And there's only one way to do that. And it's not marketing. It's pricing. So you put a lower price on it to get it to move. So in other words, it's kind of artificial. And somebody emailed me recently and asked me the question, if there's a foreclosure, she owns a home that's worth about $500,000, and there's a foreclosure on her block that's going to wind up selling for about $350,000. Now, her home was worth $500,000. It used to be worth $6,000. Now it's worth $5,000, so it's already taken the hit. But this particular house is being dumped by the bank for $350,000, and her concern was, is this going to cost me? Like, is my house now worth $350,000? All right? And it's a good question. And the answer is no. If you were selling your house right now and you were competing with that house, you would lose a buyer to that house. Okay? The buyer would say, I could pay $350,000 for this one and $5,000 for that one. I'm going to buy this one for $350,000, and you would lose that buyer. And as soon as that property came off the market, it's back to where it was again. There are some people that are not going to agree with me on this, but they'd be wrong. Okay? If you're in a market where there's 5 houses in your neighborhood that are all selling for $350,000, that's going to have a different effect because if you're going to sell, it depends on who you're competing with right now. And if you're trying to dump a property right now when there's competition pulling the price down, you revert down to the price that they're going to undercut you to. But if you can hold those markets, like one that has 5 foreclosures, that market may get dragged down a bit because of that activity. But those are just the kind of markets that I think are going to snap back quicker because, again, it's artificial. It doesn't make sense that Florida is going to go down any further than it already has. You're back to like 2002 prices in most of Florida. That is too far. And so if it goes down to 2001, that's also too far. So if you lose a little value next year or the year after, my hallucination here is that you'll get it back sooner than the rest of us will because you're getting that's an undervalued price that other person got.
Fine, I'm going to get it with the idea of being there for 20, 30 years. So yeah.
Yeah, so you're golden. I'd pull the trigger when you go down there because it's going to be a heck of a lot of fun and you're going to enjoy the experience and you're going to time it almost perfectly. And who knows what happens next year? You just never know. If it's right for you now, go for it.
Thanks very much.
All right, Neil. Thanks for the call.
I have a question for you.
Yes.
If he wasn't interested in having that property as a retirement thing, would it still be advisable for him to go look around and buy something as an investment, or is it only if it ends up being your retirement home?
I'm glad you asked that. If he was going to be doing this because he was going to retire in like 15 or 20 years and he knew he liked the area, so he wanted to kind of place a bet, take a position in that market to season it over time, and then maybe later on parlay that into a retirement home, I would suggest that he take his money and go inland. Don't go to the resort because you can't rent a resort place out for 12 months a year.
Okay.
All right? You want to go to the people who work at the resort, the manager of the resort, the people who work in the industry in that community. They live 3 or 4 miles off the beach. Okay? And if he's going to spend, I didn't ask how much money he was going to spend, but let's just take a number out of the air, $300,000. If he's going to spend $300,000 and pay cash, he could probably buy 3 $100,000 apartments 3 or 4 miles inland, rent those out annually. Mm-hmm. All right, and see the appreciation, see the rising tide, but get the positive cash flow because if it's a resort community, it's not going to be the kind of place you can get an annual tenant in there.
Okay, and you don't think managing the properties is something that ends up costing you at the end because now you've got to oversee you've got to be a landlord basically in absentia. So
you're getting good at this. These are good questions.
Sitting here every week, I'm learning something.
Yeah, when you're going to buy a property out of town, you're going to be having a property manager watch that property for you. And what I tell people is proximity is a good thing. If you could buy a property like next door to your house, that's a really easy property to manage. You have 2 front yards to cut. You have, 2 kitchens to maintain. But in the New York area where we are, it's a little bit expensive and it isn't always as easy to get positive cash flow. And so if you're looking for a market where you can get the positive cash flow, place your bet for the future, you're dealing with a property manager then. And here's my advice on that. Check references. Okay. They're your eyes and ears, and if they can't give you 3 or 4 references out of the gate, you can call and they're raving about them. keep looking because they're out there, particularly markets like Florida. A lot of property managers have begun to really grow their businesses and gotten very diligent. There's a lot of really good technology platforms out there right now that they manage them really diligently. Like you get an email that a light bulb went out and they fixed it. Like it's that tight nowadays. But you got to check your references and make sure that you're getting somebody good.
Terrific.
Right?
Thank you.
All right. So we're going up against the break here. This is Greg Rand, Rand on Real Estate. Call us. We have another segment to go. 800-848-9222, 848-WABC. Give us a call. Tell us about the market you're dreaming about. Ask questions, and we'll see if we can help you secure your future. Back in a minute.